For more on Russia's war on Ukraine, we're joined by Ian Bremmer. He's the president of the Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Ian, good morning to you. You've been very clear that you believe Russia and Putin will succeed from a military perspective in Ukraine, but emerge from that win damaged seriously on the world stage and inside Russia in other ways. What does that new world look like?
That world looks like a continued fight over Ukraine. It's pretty clear he can take Kiev, he can level Kiev if he wants to, but you're going to see millions of refugees, probably 5 to 10 million refugees, Ukrainians, across Europe. You're going to see the west of Ukraine probably still held by a legitimate Ukrainian government that all of the West will be not only recognizing politically, but they'll be supporting economically and they'll be supporting militarily. In other words, you know, people keep asking me how this is going to end. And I say, well, what do you mean end? Because we're not close to a possibility where we're going to have fighting that is resolved on the ground in Ukraine, and we're going to have much, much higher tensions between NATO states and Russia going forward. Basically, what it means is that the peace dividend that the world, and particularly Europe, has benefited from for 30 years since the wall came down is absolutely over. And the costs of that, the human and the economic costs of that, are going to be very severe.
Whether or not Putin expected the extent or magnitude of the West's reaction, his foreign minister went on the record and said, we'll simply get over this invasion. Do you, one, see that happening? And two, is there a chance that things like higher gas prices will cause the West, the U.S., to pull back its response?
The latter question's pretty easy. I think this is a sea change for the governments of the West. We see much more popularity and support for Olaf Scholz, for example, in Germany, for Macron in France, despite the fact that these countries all have vastly more economic exposure, and their populations do, to Russia than the Americans do. I don't see any wavering on the part of the Europeans to spend vastly more on defense, to focus on that as a priority, and to decouple their economies from Russia. Now, the Russian response is to make Russia more of a police state and to remove all dissent. Up to 15 years in jail you can get now if you say that there's a war going on publicly. You can't mention the war. It's kind of insane. But 150 million Russians are not going to be as easily cowed as, say, North Korean population is. And so there is going to be ongoing significant social instability in Russia that Putin is going to have to deal with and repress very severely.
Ian, we have heard a huge call and an outcry for a no-fly zone to be established. President Zelensky has said it over and over and over again. We've seen NATO countries and others providing the Ukrainians with arms, but NATO has said, no, there will not be a no-fly zone established. Can you explain why that is so different and why that will not happen right now?
It won't happen because the United States and all NATO allies have said consistently that they will not put troops on the ground in Ukraine because they don't want to risk a direct fight with the Russians that could lead to World War III. Their view is very much the same on a no-fly zone, which would lead to confrontation directly between Western military capabilities and Russian air. Having said that, from the Russian perspective, this isn't digital. The Russians see the advanced weapon systems being sent by Poland, by the Balts, by the Americans to Ukraine as acts of war. They see providing real-time intelligence about the disposition of Russian forces in Ukraine, letting the Ukrainians hammer them harder as acts of war. Those are all significant risks that NATO is taking. I'm not suggesting that you should take an additional risk with a no-fly zone, but I am suggesting that the way that Putin is perceiving this conflict is very, very different from the way that we're talking about it in the United States and with our allies.
If nothing else, it's a new world order. Ian Bremmer, thank you.